Welcome to the Which Money Podcast, your weekly hit of money news and personal finance hacks to help make you better off. I'm your host, Lucia Ariano, and here's what's coming up this week.
All these different dates are going to come up really fast, like the date you get your loan or your maintenance grant, the date you get any sort of other bursaries that you might have got, the date your first rent payment's probably due. So I do think that even just writing down the key dates and when you'll get the money in can definitely help.
There are so many more niche funds out there. In Scotland, there's a kind of charity called the Graham Trust, whereby if your surname is Graham and you study in the Glasgow area, you can get £500.
That sounds like a joke, doesn't it?
It does, exactly. And yeah, it's completely legit.
This week we're focusing on student finance. Now, whether you're a student, your kids are moving away, or as a grandparent you want to offer some words of wisdom, we've got you covered. Now, we'll be looking at student bank accounts, the scams to watch out for, and myth-busting student loans, and plenty more along the way. And to help us with all of this is podcast regular Grace Witherden from the Which Money team and Tom Allingham, who's the Communications Director at Save the Student, which is a website designed to help students make their money go further. Welcome both to the show today.
Hello.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. First of all, then, listeners will know you often give us a rundown of the best bank accounts that are out there, Grace. But before we go there, can we start with explaining what a student bank account is? How do these differ to regular current accounts?
So a student bank account is actually very, very similar to a normal bank account, but it has some features that are tailored to students. So this might come in the form of an interest-free overdraft, or it might have some extra perks or discounts tailored to students. But how you use the account and how you manage it is pretty much the same as how you would manage a normal account.
So should we hear some of the best ones on the market right now then?
So every year we round up the best student accounts with perks, because this is a really popular time of year to open a student bank account because lots of students got their A-level results a few weeks ago. So this is a time of year where lots of banks will have some perks to kind of entice you. So we've gone through all of the perks. I'm going to try and go through them all. So Lloyds, Bank of Scotland and Halifax, which are all part of the same group, are offering students £110 cash. NatWest and Royal Bank of Scotland, again part of the same group, are offering £100 cash and a 4-year taste card. A taste card can get you discount on takeaways and cinema. Nationwide is offering £100 cash plus takeaway vouchers for a year with Just Eat. And Santander is offering a 4-year rail card, and a rail card gets you a third off fares. So no cash with Santander. And with Barclays, you can get a 3-year subscription to Perligo, which is an online library, and it has lots of journals and whatnot in there. So as we can see, I always think that the best perks of cash, because with that cash, you can buy things like a taste card or a rail card, and you have a bit more flexibility what you do with the cash. You might actually want to use it for some books, or perhaps something else that will help you when you're already at university. But some banks are obviously giving the cash and something else. So Nationwide, you're also getting the takeaway vouchers, and with NatWest and RBS, you're also getting their 4-year taste card.
And Tom, what would you say? What's your advice to anyone kind of wondering how to weigh up what the best account is? Because it's not just about the incentives, is it?
No, it's not. I think you made a good point that having raw cash is probably the best type of perk because you can spend it on whatever you want. And particularly when you're talking about things like taste cards, like rail cards, those are things where they actually go on sale quite a lot throughout the year anyway. So although the kind of face value of getting a 4-year rail card might be like £100, £120, in reality, you could get it for far less if you waited for it to go on sale and just bought it yourself. But beyond the perks, I would say the real big thing that I would say over half of students need to be looking for is the interest-free overdraft that comes with a student bank account. So our research shows that the maintenance loan, which is the living cost loan that you get, falls way, way, way short of what living costs actually are. In our latest research, it was £582 every month. So across the year, you're looking at the best part of £7,000 that students are having to make up from other sources. So the chances are you will need to dip into that interest-free overdraft at some point. But not every single bank has the same allowance of interest-free overdraft, and not every bank guarantees an amount either. So some banks will offer an interest-free overdraft up to a certain amount. So in some cases, it might be up to £3,000. But then when you look into the detail, number one, it won't be £3,000 straight away. So it might be, for example, £1,000 in your first year, £2,000 in your second year, £3,000 in your third year. And also when they say up to, what that means is it will depend on factors like, for instance, your credit score and how good you've been at maybe paying back money in that time that you've had the overdraft. Also potentially whether you've gone over your agreed allowance with the bank as well. So that's something you should really be looking at. And then beyond that as well, there are some banks who do offer a guaranteed amount. So this year, there are at least a couple of banks who are offering guaranteed allowances of over £1,000. So that means, assuming you kind of pass all the very basic checks, you should get a guaranteed allowance over £1,500.
Well, before we go into credit scores and credit cards, is there a bank account then that seems to be particularly good in terms of, offering a great incentive and a good overdraft?
So this year we have kind of three main picks, well, four if you kind of include the fact that NatWest and RBS are, they're offering the same thing, part of the same banking group. So our top three for this year would be NatWest and RBS, Santander and Nationwide. All of them kind of offer slightly different things, but in the main, they offer a good overdraft allowance. And kind of anecdotally, we know that with some of them, even when it's not a guaranteed allowance, you do have a good chance of getting it as well. But also as well, all of those we kind of already heard from Grace do offer good perks as well.
And should we bring in credit cards now then? Because we're talking about overdrafts and potentially needing to dip into them. Are credit cards ever a good idea?
I would say for students, generally, I would say no. There are a very, very small minority of banks who do offer student credit cards. So going back to when I was at university, so, just over 10 years ago, there were probably the majority of banks were offering student credit cards. But now, as far as I'm aware, only 2 banks offer student credit cards. And the reason I'm talking about student credit cards specifically is that in general, students will find it quite difficult to get a regular credit card because they won't pass things like, for example, the credit check or the income checks and things like that. In the rare case that a student, does think that a credit card is a good option for them, that would only be, I would say, if you know you can pay it off in full every month, because student credit cards definitely will come with an interest rate. It'll be very, very difficult for a student to get a 0% credit card. So given that they will be charged interest on their debt, they'll be far, far better off dipping into their 0% overdraft, because that's something where they won't have to start paying it back at least until they graduate. And even then, it becomes a graduate bank account, so they'll get a 1 year, 2 year, maybe even 3 years to pay it back.
What about credit scores? Because obviously credit cards can help build up your credit score. Is that something that a student should be thinking about?
When you're a student, you have so many other financial challenges to overcome that a credit score, obviously you don't want to do your credit score any damage. But in terms of building it and getting into a position where you're able to take out, a good amount of credit, whether that be a loan or a mortgage or whatever, I personally would regard that as something to kind of look at post-uni. But, that said, there are things that you could and should be doing whilst you're at university, at least to keep it on an even footing. So, for example, getting yourself on the electoral roll, even keeping up to date with, your mobile phone contract payments and things like that. You don't have to worry about actively building it at university, but do be wary that, for example, missing an energy bill payment could bring it down. So just, don't worry about building it, but just try not to, do any harm.
Well, should we talk a bit more then about budgeting and, how can you avoid missing an energy bill? What's your advice for students, just budgeting? As you said, the amount that you need compared to the amount you might get from a loan, there can be quite different. So what's your advice there?
Yeah, so it sounds really boring, and to a certain extent it kind of is, but the number one thing you can do is to make a budget. So particularly for students who haven't started university yet, to kind of lay out what amount of money you'll be getting from your loan, how much you think you'll be getting from your parents, if you've already got a part-time job, to factor that in. Otherwise, kind of look at realistically how many hours might you be able to do when you're at university, kind of put all that together, work out how much money you'll be getting every week or every month or whatever, and then looking at roughly what you think your outgoings will be. Now, we do have a template kind of spreadsheet on the website, which does contain the average values of things like groceries, rent, bills, all that kind of stuff that is kind of sourced from our surveys. And then you kind of extrapolate that over the year just to get a rough idea of what you'll be working with. Are there any holes that you need to fill in? Do you need to be maybe working a few more hours? Do your parents maybe need to be contributing a little bit more? Should you be looking for bursaries, grants, scholarships, all that kind of thing? But yeah, as I say, the fundamental message is you should do a budget, as much as it might take, 30 minutes, an hour or whatever. It might not be the most fun thing you do, but it will definitely be the best thing you can do to kind of get yourself off to a good start financially.
All these different dates are going to come up really fast, like the date you get your loan or your maintenance grant, the date you get any sort of other bursaries that you might have got. the date your first rent payment's probably due, and then Freshers Week comes up really quickly.
Yeah.
So I do think that even just like writing down the key dates and when you'll get the money in can definitely help, because then you'll have sort of an idea of like if there's going to be like any gaps where you're going to like need to go into that overdraft, but then maybe when you can pay back that overdraft.
And, I suppose while we're just on this, could we give a nod to any kind of student discounts? Is there anything in particular that you'd like to shout out to help students save a bit of money?
Yeah, so our ethos is always ask for a student discount every single time. So obviously, everyone kind of knows about, for example, 10% off at ASOS, lots of other ones as well. There are lots of the kind of big student discounts people know about. But there'll be lots of independent shops, independent restaurants, particularly in major university cities and towns, who do offer student discounts, but you just might not have heard about them. And the absolute worst thing that will happen is they just say, no, sorry, we don't do the student discount. And the best thing that happens is that you get 20%, 30%, whatever off your bill. So ask for it every single time, and you're never going to be out of pocket for it.
I think I used to ask my local hairdresser for a student discount at uni, and that was a local. And I think.
And did you get it?
Known. Yeah, I always got it, and my eyebrow threading as well.
Very nice.
And so I always got my like £1 or £2 discount. Yeah, loved that student card.
And can we give council tax a shout as well? Because you can get discount here too for students, can't you?
Yeah, so students don't pay council tax, but you do need to get a sort of a letter. This is really taking me back. But yeah, if you're renting, I can't imagine you'll have to deal with this if you're in halls. But I think if you're renting a property, you will have to get sort of a letter from your council to say you are a student, a letter of exemption. It won't happen automatically. They don't know you're students, the council won't.
I feel like this is something that people really miss out on. And I started working at Which after my sister-in-law was at uni, and she was living at home for a part of it, and I think she could have got money, or her mum could have got money off of her bill, but it's just, I don't feel like it's not that well known. So this is something for parents, grandparents, whoever the student is living with too, isn't it? It's advice for them too. Yeah,
the reason I smiled when you mentioned it is because in my second year of uni, I forgot to send the exemption letter in, and by January had a county court summons sent to my
wow.
email.
Now that will ruin your credit score.
Yes, it will. And I don't know if it's still on there or not. I really hope it isn't. But yeah, I completely forgot to do it. And I just, for some reason, just thought like, well, the council will know that I'm a student. And then when I got that letter through, giving us a court date and everything, that's when I kind of panicked into gear and sent them all the necessary information. And that fortunately didn't have to go to court. I don't think I had to pay any kind of late fees or any kind of admin fees or anything. But yeah, absolutely get it done as soon as possible so you don't have that sheer panic that I had.
Well, after a quick break, we'll be back to looking at scams and plenty around student loans. And we'll wrap up, of course, with some top tips. Welcome back to the show. Now, like with so many things online, the world of student finance is a target for scammers. It is no exception. And there are a few doing the rounds now that we think everybody should be aware of. Grace, can you start us off?
Yeah, our scams team have spotted a few of these doing the rounds recently. It's a really popular time. Lots of people are applying for their student loan and receiving it. So one of the scams we spotted was that scammers were trying to con students to give away personal and financial information by impersonating the Student Loans Company and Student Finance England. So the Student Loan Company warned students back in January that some people had received some letters claiming to be from SLC investigations. Actually, they were emailing students ahead of the new term to say that they should expect a call from a withheld number to verify their payment details. And the Student Loans Company has confirmed that it will never proactively contact students to verify bank details ahead of a payment. So obviously, if you receive a suspicious call or message, don't respond and instead log into your online account to see if you have any messages. So that's, my general consensus is that I will rarely answer. I don't know if anyone else does this, but I will rarely answer the phone unless I know who's actually calling me. Because I always think if it's that important, they'll leave a message. And when I can check the message, I can sort of scout out and actually Google stuff myself rather than be put on the spot answering a phone call. So that's one to watch out for, and especially any dodgy emails that you might get. It's always best, never forward these emails, never open any attachments on these emails, check for sort of spelling mistakes, and then actually always just log on to your online account, because all the messages will sort of go through there anyway. So that's like a really quick way of verifying if it's legitimate. And then another scam we spotted was fake tuition fee discounts. So actually this scam was targeting international students. And the scammers basically offered a discount on tuition fees if you made a full payment up front. So back in July, the independent Cambridge University publication Varsity reported that a scam appeared to be using the Cambridge student email address, and it offered an early payment discount on these fees. So this email then directed students to fill out a Google form with their personal details. And then it had a second email sent, which gave the bank account number, the bank account details. And we've seen similar scams as well with fake scholarship offers, where a victim's contacted to inform them of a scholarship's available, and then they provide their personal information. So basically, any request for your information, always contact your university directly, independently. Google the contact address, the email, the number, before you give any of that out.
And Tom, is this something that you come across a lot, students being targeted by scammers?
Yeah, in particular, the student loan company ones is something where, so I've been at Save the Student now for just over 7 years. And since the day I started, this is something that we've seen, and obviously it's been going on before that as well. So although the individual type of scam does kind of change year on year, the scammers get more sophisticated, they try different things. They are still targeting the same groups of students with the same kind of core thing, which is posing as the student loans company.
And I've got here as well an example where scammers are targeting students looking to make money. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of kind of big areas, I would say, certainly that we've heard of, where students being targeted, kind of giving them the opportunity to make money. So one of the more kind of, I would say one of the more scary ones would be money muling, which is essentially where criminal gangs who are looking to kind of launder their money. So I don't know if we've seen like Breaking Bad, stuff like that. They essentially have to clean their money to kind of, remove all traces of criminal activity. So in money muling, they'll contact a third party. So let's say it's a student in this case. And they'll say, we want to transfer £10,000 through your bank account. And the reward for you is you'll get to keep a certain percentage of that. So let's say, for argument's sake, you get to keep £1,000 of that. Now, obviously, because this is a criminal gang, the money's gained from criminal activity, in some cases, things as bad as human trafficking. Obviously, the transfer of that money is illegal. And you, the third party who has transferred the money through your account, you are also liable. Now, in some cases, if the police, if the investigation finds that you were tricked into doing this and you weren't really aware what you were doing, you can be kind of spared a criminal sentence. Although, if it turns out that you were aware of what you're doing, then you could be looking at several years in prison. But even if you are spared a prison sentence, you'll still face difficulty with things like getting credit, opening a bank account, things like that. So that could last for several years afterwards. So definitely be aware of money muling. That's
quite a scary one, isn't it? I mean, is that a common thing? Is that happening a lot in the UK?
It's happening in terms of absolute numbers. I wouldn't know. But what I do know is that the percentage of people who are being targeted, it's far more targeted at young people. So again, I don't have the exact number to mind, but it's a huge proportion of people under 30 make up a kind of overall proportion of those being targeted by money muling.
And are there any others then where people are targeted trying to make money?
Yeah, so job scams would be another one. And this is something where even now, like I get these text messages.
Me too, actually.
Yeah, there you go. So somebody texting you saying something along the lines of like, do you want to make £100 an hour, quick and easy, you can work from home, all that kind of stuff. And, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it's not legit. But yeah, in these cases, what they'll try and do sometimes, for example, is they'll ask you to pay for things like training or equipment or things like that. But rather than you kind of going on, let's say Amazon and buying a desk, they'll say, you need to transfer us £100, £200 to buy the desk to then send it to you. Now, again, obviously, because none of this is legit, that money doesn't end up going towards a desk. You just lose that money outright. Obviously, when you're a student and you do want to find a part-time job, it can sometimes be difficult. And when someone texts you offering a job out of the blue, you'll be tempted to just go for it.
Well, that brings me on to then I wanted to ask you if you do have any advice for students trying to make money.
Yes. So number one, if you are looking for a conventional part-time job, the biggest advice I can give would be to apply early. So particularly with things like Christmas jobs, you get to university, let's say late September. By that point, some of those jobs will already be taken, either by students who are in their second and third year or by people who just live locally. So if you can apply early before you even get to university, start looking, before you get there 2-3 weeks in advance, you'll already be ahead of the pack. So that's a really good way to get in ahead of that. But then beyond kind of conventional part-time jobs, you can look at more unusual like side hustles as well. So two of the ones I always come back to, number one is becoming an extra in like TV and film and stuff like that. And the reason I like to bring it up is because that, unlike some of the kind of job scans that we mentioned earlier, that is something where you do not need any experience. So you don't need to have any acting background or whatever.
I remember I went to a kind of session where I'd signed up, and it wasn't quite an interview, but it never went any further than that.
Yeah.
But I definitely looked into this, and it was quite exciting to me back then.
I remember waking up early one Saturday because we were all going to queue up to see if we could be extras in Les Mis. And I think they'd found their extras before we even got to the line, so we went shopping in Oxford Street instead. But yeah, those were good, those ones, because they're often like in the week, aren't they? And students, depending on what your degree is, your course is like, you do often have those sort of days off in the middle of the week where you don't have any lectures, so they're quite good to fit around that. You can get ahead of the sort of like full-timers. Yeah,
absolutely. And also it's just a bit more fun than like working in a bar or working in a shop or something. To potentially be in a film or like be in something that's going to be on Netflix or something, I think is way more fun. And also I think, in some cases I think you can sign up with agencies as well. So it might not necessarily be a case where you're having to queue up to do something, they hopefully will be able to secure you the work in advance. Beyond becoming an extra, I think the other example that I always like to come back to is pet sitting as well. Now, there are some things that you'll need to consider. So you might need to get some level of insurance, particularly if you're having the pets at your own home. But again, it's something where you don't typically need any kind of formal qualifications or experience. And, there is also, if you kind of, looking at it in a more abstract sense, there is kind of research to show that, being around pets and everything is beneficial to your mental health, and we know that mental health is a big struggle for a lot of students as well. So you kind of get the double benefit of that one. And then even beyond all of that, I would like to go back to definitely bursary scholarships and grants. We kind of briefly mentioned it earlier, but we always like to underline the fact that there are so many funds out there that people don't even think that they would be eligible for. So I think everyone knows that, you can get funding for, good grades or from coming from a low income background or excelling in a particular subject or sport or whatever. But there are so many more niche funds out there. There's one that the Vegetarian Society pays out to students who are vegetarian. In Scotland, there's a kind of charity called the Graham Trust, whereby if your surname is Graham and you study in the Glasgow area, you can get £500.
That sounds like a joke, doesn't it?
It does, exactly. And yeah, it's completely legit. And I think the University of Roehampton pays out an esports scholarship. So if you're good at kind of online gaming, obviously you have to be, of quite a good standard to get this, but it's still like £2,000. So I think what it really underlines is that, yes, those are 3 quite niche examples I've given you, but there are funds out there for all kinds of weird and kind of wonderful aspects of your personality that you would never think could entitle you to money.
Yeah, I feel like it's worth just sitting down one afternoon and like really researching everything, because that might give you some money down the line.
Exactly.
At afternoon's work. I did actually get one from my like local village. Like my mum was just at like a party in the park or whatever, and then one of the counsellors said to her, she said, Grace is off to do, you need to do this. And they said, because she's from the village, she could get £500 towards her books. And it was really easy to apply for. I just had to say what I was going to do with the money, and I was just going to buy some course books. And she literally just found out that through like word of mouth.
Well, can we now move on to student loans? I realise that's quite a big topic for us to move on to, but I do think there's quite a big misconception around student loans and when you actually start paying back. So can we start there, Grace, with some of the basics?
Yeah, so to keep it very basic, the earliest you'll start repaying your student loan is the April after your course has ended, or the April 4 years after your course started, if your course is longer than 4 years. But you won't repay anything until you earn above a certain amount, and this varies depending what plan you're on, because obviously people that went to university pre 2012 were on plan 1, post 2012 were on plan 2. We've now got a new plan, so you always, just because someone earns this and someone earns that, you might be paying back completely different amounts when you eventually get employment. So, for example, this tax year, those on Plan 1 will start repaying when they earn £24,990 a year before tax. And those on Plan 2 won't start repayments until they earn at least £27,295 a year. So you'll have to log on to the government website if you're unsure which plan you're on. Check which plan you're on and check what the earning thresholds are. So basically, it's nothing really to start worrying about when you're at university, because you're not going to start paying that back until you leave university, and then until you start earning a decent wage.
And how much are you likely to be paying back per month? And I suppose on the whole, are you likely to be paying it all back?
Yeah, so the answer is, annoyingly, it depends. So it depends on, as we've heard, kind of when you started university, but also which part of the UK you're from as well. So Scotland also has its own student loan plan, the Plan 1 as well, which we heard is, for students in England who started before 2012. It's also still the existing plan in Northern Ireland as well. So there's all of these different factors to consider. But there is a fundamental same principle throughout all of them, which is that you only pay 9% of your earnings over a threshold. So if we take the Plan 5, that's the new one in England, as an example, just because it's a nice round number of £25,000. So let's say that you're earning £35,000. So that's £10,000 over the £25,000 threshold. That means across the year, you're earning, as I say, £10,000 more. So you take 9% of that, which means over the year, you're going to pay £900 in student loan repayments. Now, over your lifetime, obviously, your repayments will increase. Well, assuming that your income increases, your repayments will increase. So there is a chance that you will repay it in full. But what I would say is that doesn't apply to all students. So on Plan 2, which is no longer in effect, so, well, it is for students who are currently at university, but no new students will enroll on Plan 2. For that, it's roughly 20% will repay in full. So 80% will have at least some of their debt cancelled at the end of the 30 years. On Plan 5, which is a new one in England, so they've extended the repayment period to 40 years. And as we've heard as well, the repayment threshold is lower. So as a result, the chances of you repaying in full are higher. But even then, it's still about 50%. So roughly half of students will repay in full, but still roughly half will have at least some of it cancelled at the end of that repayment period. And on Plan 5 as well, it is worth noting that because the interest rate has now been capped at RPI only, so in other words, it's been capped at just the rate of interest, what that means is that although at the end of that repayment period, the actual kind of number that you're looking at might look higher than the initial amount you borrowed, in real terms, so that's taking inflation into account, you will have only repaid as much as you borrowed, even if you repaid in full.
I remember when I was at school, my PE teacher saying, "It's the best loan you'll ever get." I mean, you're nodding, Tom. I don't know, looking back, I'm not sure if that was good advice or bad advice.
It depends. Well, I'm nodding in the sense that it probably is the best loan you'll ever get. But obviously, there are other factors to consider. So I wouldn't kind of advise a student, not that necessarily your teacher would, but I wouldn't say to a student, "Oh, you should go to university because it's the best loan you'll ever get." Obviously, there are other factors to consider. But I think in terms of the fact that there's no obligation to pay it back in full, in other words, it will be cancelled, the fact that it is tied to your income. So that, a good example to compare it to would be private student loans, which we would generally advise against. Now with those, as soon as you graduate, you're liable to start repaying them. And it doesn't matter how much you're earning, if you're earning at all, they will expect you to be making the repayments, which in a lot of cases, you're talking several £100s a month. You will never get that with the government student loan, and it won't affect your credit score. You'll never have bailiffs knocking on your door. I'm not saying it's absolutely perfect, and we want a lot of reform to be made to student finance. We want tuition fees to be abolished, but broadly speaking, I think the terms are very manageable, and shouldn't be something to actively put someone off going to university.
And can we just come back to that point? It kind of came up naturally. You went to uni many years ago, maybe, and you haven't logged in to check how much you owe or anything about your repayments or, any details at all, really. What's your advice for somebody in those shoes?
So you should be able to see how much you pay monthly by looking at your pay slip, because it comes off automatically. You never get that money into your bank account. So that's a good way to keep an eye on how much you make, how much you pay monthly. There are some occasions where you might be due a refund. We have done a story on this where basically if you've paid too much or you started being charged too early, you actually can get a refund. This became quite big last year because a lot of people did this. And you can always log on to your student loan account. It's the same one that you would have used to apply for your loan. I think I'd forgotten my password. It was really easy to reset it.
I was just thinking, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I think I put it in a small book, but I have no idea what that small book is anymore.
I think I had my customer number on an email account, which I searched. I was able to really easily reset my password, logged on. There, I could see it in black and white, and you sort of know how much you paid off each year. You can sort of log on to your messages, and you'll see like a statement of how much you've paid each year. So it is really easy to keep track of if you want to know how much you're paying.
Any final advice, anything that we've covered that you want to mention again, or something we haven't covered that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
For me, I'd come back to that point about bursaries. There's a stat from a few years ago that I think it was from the Scholarship Hub, and it might be slightly outdated now, but it will still kind of be broadly relevant. And it was that £100 million of funding goes unclaimed every single year, in part because students don't know they're eligible. So again, okay, there's a good chance that after 2-3 hours of looking, you might not find anything, but you also might. And if at the end of that 2-3 hours, you do find something, let's say you get, £2,000 bursary coming your way, you're probably never going to have a better paid 2 or 3 hours in your entire life. So it's definitely worth spending the time looking.
I'd probably loop back to the budgeting point because now I think about it, actually knowing how much you're going to spend is really, and how much you're going to have coming in is so useful. And you don't even have to sit down with a spreadsheet. There's so many budgeting apps now. We also have a list on our website that sort of track your spending. You can do roundup features. You can do budgeting challenges. And that might be easier to do once you've started uni, maybe give it a few weeks to see how much you're spending on food a week, how much you sort of spend going out, and it might be easier to work out once you're there, which is still fine because even doing it at that point is going to save you time and money, I think, down the line.
Well, super helpful. It's been a great show. Thank you both so much for sharing so much knowledge. I really hope, I'm sure it has helped many listeners today. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, a huge thank you again to Grace and Tom for coming on the show today, and to you for listening to this week's episode of the Which Money Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please do hit subscribe to make sure you catch our new episodes as soon as they drop. For daily money news and advice, you can find us on social media at Which Money and online at which.co.uk/money. And we also have a free money newsletter which is delivered to your inbox every Monday. To sign up, visit which.co.uk/money newsletter. This episode of the Which Money Podcast was written and presented by me, Lucia Ariano, produced by James Rowe, and edited by Rob Lilly-Jones.